has given us consent to record. Okay. Um, Good evening. I'm Yamini. I'm one of the founding members of Kirti Collective. Because we have a lot of new people today, I'm just going to briefly introduce Kirti Collective before I introduce the speaker today. Kirti Collective was started in 2021. It was an attempt to bring, academics working broadly on the region of Deccan with the idea of communicating with public. That is, we understand that largely academic discourse is within a very limited community. So we wanted to expand the boundaries of that and have a conversation with public. And towards this end, we have attempted various things. We have attempted what we call the Deccan Conversations, which is where we invite young scholars, upcoming scholars working on the Deccan to come and present their work. Then we recently have started another couple of series. One is Past Matters, where we are discussing various attempts at public history in India. Today, we are starting a new series on languages of the Deccan with today's talk. Apart from these talks, which happen online periodically, we also have attempted a public writing series. We have hosted it in the Wire, News Minute, and we've done three such series. One of our series on the 1948, we've also translated into multiple languages, into Kannada, Telugu, and Marathi as well. And we are interested in working with translations and multiple languages of the Deccan, and that's why this series. We've also conducted a public writing workshop last year, again with the same aim of enabling or conversations or giving skills or discussing the skills required for academics to be able to communicate with larger public. With that said, let me introduce today's series. Today's series is Languages of the Deccan. Languages of the Deccan, we understand that the Deccan region has been very rich linguistically. It has multiple language formations and sometimes even intermingling formations and identities associated with it. And we are interested in how languages, identities, histories are interlinked and and sometimes converge and diverge. Through language, we are trying to understand the region itself, and in that attempt, we have invited scholars who work on be it linguistics or be it even histories of language, histories of literatures, histories of linguistic publics, politics associated with language, etc. So that's the broadly what the series is about, and today is the first talk of the series. Um, I take this opportunity to invite Professor Dr. Niveditha Kalarikkal, who has very generously agreed to present her work today. Today's talk is titled Breaking the Frontiers of Linguistic States, Language Contact and Creole Identities in the Indian Peninsula. I will introduce Dr. Kalarikkal. Dr. Niveditha Kalarikkal teaches in the Center for Comparative Literature, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, Kerala. She has taught in the Center for Comparative Literature and Translation Studies, Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar, for 8 years, and holds a PhD in Translation Studies from the University of Hyderabad. Her research areas include translation studies, print culture studies, and post-colonial studies. She has published extensively in reputed journals in both English and Malayalam. We are very thankful to Professor Kalarikkal for agreeing to, have a conversation with us. I now invite Dr. Kalarikkal to take us through her work.
Thank you, Yamini. Thank you for the introduction, especially the introduction about KK Collective and what we are planning to do is very helpful in this regard, I think, because I wish to talk in more like in a tone which is more than academic or not traditionally academic in that sense. And one more thing I would like to add in the beginning itself, since you have titled this as languages of the Deccan. I would not be specifically talking about languages of the Deccan in that sense. I would generally talk about a few things related to the language politics in India. Maybe like taking it from the current time period to time periods like to 5-6 centuries behind, going till the 16th century. And I would wish to talk about specifically about like 2 or 3 themes. In the sense that from the title itself, as you can see, like one issue is about how this linguistic states in India as we have now have been organized in the specific way. And in many instances where linguistic identity is considered as something equal to cultural homogeneity. So one linguistic group or one linguistic state would have a homogeneous cultural identity of its own. This is a presumption that would come on the basis of this linguistic state reorganization after, specifically after the Act of 1956. That is one thing that I would like to talk about. And second area that I would like to touch upon is, as a result of this linguistic reorganization Act of 1956 and how this newly formed linguistic states came into being, there is this idea of like minority languages or what you call as the marginal or minority languages came into being. There are constitutional provisions, just like there are constitutional provisions for minority communities. There are also constitutional provisions to protect minority languages and discussions about minority languages as part of the administrative mechanism and otherwise also. And then at the end, I would also like to talk about this idea of Creoles. So Creole as a linguistic category and beyond the linguistic definitions of or how Creole as a category is defined in or talked about in linguistics or specifically in social linguistics. There is a very general idea of Creole, as in Creole identities as language and cultural identities of particular mixed kinds. And these are the 3 areas which I would like to touch upon, which are interconnected, but I would like to keep them as distinct also. And coming to this discussion, I would start with like how I came to this area, like what drew my interest to talk about this itself. It came from this. There are this series of heritage walks that are conducted by the Kochi Heritage Center. Of late, in the last few months, these have been organized. So I happened to be part of one of those walks, heritage walks, almost a month back, and it was titled as Kochi Portuguese Walk. And there are other walks which follow, like heritage walks, which are organized in the weeks after that, and each of them are titled in such a way that in within this region, which is like generally termed as Cochin, you can see different pockets within a 10 or 15 kilometer, not even 10, yeah, maybe 10 kilometer circumference. You can see pockets where there are different cultural linguistic communities inhabiting, which create this area or space called Cochin itself. So, somebody who lives in the present day linguistic state of Kerala and going and visiting this very small pockets within the city of Cochin, it is a completely eye-opening experience for an average Malayali. And that is what made me think about, okay, what are the identities that we can think about when we think beyond the idea of territoriality in the traditional sense. So we think about territory as generally in terms of land, right? Land and the people who inhabit a land which is mostly as a closed land, right? Land which is isolated, or pieces of land or regions which are not in an interconnected most of the time in our day-to-day interactions, day-to-day affairs. But when the sea comes into the picture, or when travel, migration, and movement comes into the picture, the way in which we look at territories itself becomes different. So that is one thing that suddenly struck me after this like 3 or 4 hours Portuguese Kochi heritage walk. And I thought like, okay, let me think about what is happening. Like, what is the cultural linguistic space called Cochin at present, and what all layers of history, like linguistic, cultural history, is added to the space of a space called present day Kochi over the years. That is how I came to this topic. Yeah. So, when we think of traditional linguistics, in the case of we think of language communities, like speech communities, in certain sense. So, speech, I mean, in the sense that when in the case of the State Reorganization Act of 1956. After the State Reorganization Act of 1956, we had 14 states and 6 union territories in India. And Kerala is also one state that came into being out of these, like among these 14 states as a result of the 1956 State Reorganization. So I had shared 2 maps with Swati. I think she'll be able to share those. Can you share it, Swati? From
Yes, just sharing it.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Is this the one?
yeah, yeah. I hope it is visible, right? So this is the state of affairs after the 1956 State Reorganization Act. So there was, of course, a commission to study the possibilities of linguistic state formation and all. And there is, like, looking at the history of this, we can see that soon after independence, there was a linguistic provinces commission that was there in 1948, which is created to look into the possibility of dividing states according to the parameter of language. And then this 1948 Linguistic Provinces Commission actually rejected this idea of state formation on the basis of language. And PM Jawaharlal Nehru appointed the State Reorganization Commission in 1953, which actually put forth this later idea of linguistic reorganization of states, according to which this 1956 state formations happened. And before this, in between, between this 1948 commission and this 1956 state reorganization, we can see that, like in the 1950s, after the Indian Constitution came into being, the way in which states were classified were as like Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part D states. Part C and Part D are part of the current union territories. Part A and Part B are Part A states were those ones which were mostly like princely, under the governor's rule during the colonial times, and Part B were mostly the princely states which joined together as larger unions of princely states. And so this Part A, Part B, Part C, those kinds of classifications gave way to 1956 model of what you call as 14 states and 6 union territories. So the idea behind this model was that we need to have a federal system of governance of some sort, and so the regional demands of people will be addressed within this unified federal framework. So in order to ensure that regional demands of diverse cultural and linguistic groups need to be met, the most common code that can be used for administration and and in areas of education and politics would be one of the major languages that is present in a particular region or one territorial region in India. And so that particular language can be kept as the official language of that particular linguistic state. And this is the idea based on which the linguistic reorganization 1956 came into being. There is another map which, if you can share, Swati. Yeah. Yeah, so this one is a little more earlier one after the 1950 division of like as part A, part B, part C, part D kind of state. So in which you can see that when we come to southern India, it's the Madras is one unit, then you have Mysore, and then Travancore, Cochin as one unit, and there are other units likewise. So this is quite different from the 1956 map that we just saw. So I hope the difference is clear. And yeah, so and we like looking at the history of this linguistic identity formation, or what you call as the linguistic reorganization of state, we can see that the movement for linguistic states had started much earlier, even before independence. So it as most of us know, it was Odisha's demand for a separate province. So it at that time it was provinces like Bombay, Madras, Calcutta kind of provinces. So Odisha had already asked for a separate provincial status based on language by 1886. And in 1936, Odisha had already become a province based on common language before independence itself. And we also know that by 1953, the Telugu speaking districts of Madras had also become the state of Andhra. And it following this is this formation of 14 states and 6 union territories model in 1956. So as a result of this, what happens is that we have this classification or a kind of a hierarchization of languages in India, or linguistic communities in that sense also. So we have 22 official languages, and which are the major administrative languages. And in addition to that, as we know, that it's not just 22 official languages. According to the 2011 census, we have 19,569 languages, almost near to 20,000 languages, technically speaking, according to the census. But there is this idea of the rationalized mother tongues. So the number of the rationalized mother tongues amount to 1,369 rationalized mother tongues, of which it is reported that almost 400 languages are facing threat of extinction these days. So it is in this context that we have to rethink about, or like go back and think about what would have this idea of like linguistic states done to the diverse linguistic scenario in the subcontinent. The constitutional provision of minority languages, minority communities, and all we may be familiar with, most of us may be familiar with. So in addition to this 22 official languages, we know that minority languages, there are minority languages of various kinds are there. So though all these different languages can be categorized under the under the uniform label of minority languages, again there are different varieties of languages coming under this category. And among all these different minority languages, tribal languages would be seen as the most vulnerable of all the languages. And there are languages of particular ethnic groups in addition, and which are also part of the minority languages. And then coming to other kinds of languages which are not even talked about in the list of the 22 official languages, or in the list of minority languages, there are some particular linguistic codes, a lot of linguistic codes, which I would broadly call as Creole languages, or like Creole identities in that sense. Because language, I don't wish to demarcate language and culture as two separate entities, because they are interconnected to a large extent. And these are the languages which are mostly born out of trade relations, and which come through our the colonial past, or colonization, the European colonization, and communities which settled down during the colonial period in the Indian subcontinent, and so on. And coming to this linguistic minorities, right? When we talk about minority languages, linguistic minorities are groups. These are technically defined as groups whose mother tongue differs from the official languages of the regions they reside, according to the 8th schedule of the Constitution, these languages have provision. There are provisions to protect these languages too. So the tribal languages and other minority languages are supposed to be protected according to there are constitutional provisions for the protection of these languages, and there is a commissioner for linguistic minorities who is supposed to take care of or look into these matters of preservation of minority languages. So languages like Tulu, Konkani, Bodo, Sindhi, Maithili, Kashmiri, all these languages are supposed to be the speakers of these languages or the linguistic communities corresponding to these languages have a right to conserve their script and culture, and also to administer their own educational institutions, because there are chances that the people who belong to these linguistic and cultural minority communities may be marginalized because of the major language or the dominant language in the region where they are inhabiting. So these are the special rights that are given to these linguistic bar cultural minorities, and because they may face challenges in accessing education because their mother tongue is a minority one or minor one in relation to the dominant language of that particular state or region where they are living. So and also they may face difficulty in finding employment opportunities and stuff like that. And another one is the risk of cultural assimilation and cultural assimilation as well as language loss, the risk of language loss that these communities may face. So there is a very clearly articulated provision about what are minority languages and what should be the provisions to protect the interest of these language speakers of this belonging to the speech communities and so on. But though, the issue of whether it is actually brought into practice through administrative mechanisms or not is an altogether different thing. And it is widely accepted that most vulnerable among these linguistic minorities are those belonging to tribes, and because there are hardly any government schemes to integrate these languages into the education system, which leads to linguistic discrimination and assimilation. Assimilation into the mainstream regional and linguistic identity. So in turn, it results in a kind of indirect promotion of assimilation, though there are provisions for minority languages. Then there is an indirect promotion of assimilation into the majority regional. Either it is into the majority regional language, which is the language which is used for educational purposes in that particular state or region, or it would be English, which becomes the other medium of instruction. So though the provisions are there for alleviating this backward, because these either English or the dominant regional language is promoted through schooling as a means to alleviate the backwardness of this vulnerable or minority linguistic bar cultural community. And then comes a set of other languages or cultures which are not even talked about in any of these categories, neither in this category of scheduled languages, nor in this category called minority languages, which needs protection, or the speech communities whose cultural and linguistic roots needs to be safeguarded aside from assimilation into the mainstream. This is what I would generally refer to here as what you call as Creole identities. So the term like Pidgin and Creole, people who are familiar with social linguistics would know that the term Creole in general, or even in literary studies, we talk about like Creole identities at times, right? So hybrid linguistic identities are the ones which are referred to by Creole. So technically speaking, Pidgins are languages which are which are mixtures or mixed forms where the grammar or structure of one particular language and the vocabulary items of another language is mixed, especially when two different groups of people, like different two distinct linguistic and cultural groups come into contact as part of trade relations, as part of colonization, settlement, migration, etc. And as part of this primary interaction, there are these mixed languages which would develop, which are called as pidgins. And after the migrant group gets settled, or there is an intermixing, actual cultural and ethnic intermixing of the two different groups that happen, the language becomes almost the mother tongue or the first language of the next generation who are born out of this intermixing. Then this is called as the process of creolization, or a Creole language is born. That is the idea. So I mean, and we can say that it's not just linguistic identities, but also cultural identities that cut across what you call as the subnational identities, what we call as the subnational identities, and or the regional identities in India. There are these Creole identities which are present, which are rarely talked about, or there may be like specific scholars who would be studying about these pockets of like cultural groups. Other than that, they are invisible to the mainstream eye usually. So as I had mentioned earlier, this Portuguese community in the Waipin region of Cochin is one of that kind. Especially like in the 16th century, from 16th century onwards, there are many Creole languages in India, and we know that like Nagamese is usually spoken as the most noted of all the Creole languages in India, right? The Nagamese is a Creole language which is based on which has a history of Assamese trade with Assamese community, trade between different tribal communities of Nagaland and Assamese people, so Assamese traders. And Nagamese supposedly started as a pidgin during this trade relations, later on achieved a Creole or attained a Creole status. And there are other Creole languages in the Indian subcontinent that we talk about, like Arunachali Hindi, or even what you call as Andamani Creole Hindis, I mean, which is Hindi, which is a mixture of Hindustani, Bengali, and Tamil. There are complex Creoles like those, where more than two, like even three linguistic codes get intermixed to create a Creole language. And there was a recent interesting publication. There was a novel which was written in what you call as the Franco-Tamil Creole, which is titled as Le Tinnai. So it is the French Tamil intermixing in the Pondicherry region. So coming to the Coromandel Coast, we have those kind of like the French dominions in part of the parts like regions like Pondicherry, which gave rise to this the Franco-Tamil Creole, right? So, and the novel which was written in this Creole, which was published recently, brought a lot of attention to the Portuguese-French Creole identities or people in the eastern part of the Indian Peninsula. Yeah, and in addition to this, coming to the western coast of India, it is mostly like the most number of Creoles or Creole identities that we can see is in connection with the intermixing of local languages with that of Portuguese. So as we know, like from 1498, the coming of Vasco da Gama, and later on the series of like inquisitions and the history of inquisitions, and from 16th century onwards, what happens from Goa to Kerala, the entire western coast, there is a like strong presence of Portuguese traders, and also there is an interaction. It's not just interactions in terms of like trade, but beyond that, there is also a cultural and what you call as intermixing of different religious communities, religious and cultural groups, right, which are distinct. It's not just these are communities not just different in terms of language, but in religious differences between the Portuguese and the Portuguese traders or Portuguese, the incoming Portuguese and the people who are here are there. So there are intermixings happening between these Portuguese incoming Portuguese groups and the different linguistic groups across the western coast of India. And that is where this Portuguese Cochin Creole, as it is much like very well known, in the Waipin region of Cochin. Waipin is an island. So technically speaking, we always say that languages which the Creoles are languages which arise from intense contact between two or more languages, typically in the context of European overseas expansion. This is how we generally talk about Creole. So there is always the history of European overseas expansion, which gives rise to this Creoles or intermixed languages. And we can see that across the Atlantic and the history of slave trade, which we can also read in Amita Ghosh's novels as well, where the formation of Creole identities coming with the slave trade, colonial slave trade, we can read about, right? So that Creoles typically develop in, and this is how it is defined. Like Creoles are supposedly typically developed in constrained geographical and social settings, like islands or segregated communities during a defined historical period. So in the case of this Portuguese Creoles across the western coast of India, we can see that it's from the 16th century onwards till the 20th century, hardly like towards the 20th century, that they were thriving. By 1930s and 1940s, many of these Creole communities began losing a particular what you call as distinct identity of its own. Though there are linguists who are still studying the Indo-Portuguese Creoles of Malabar region and of what you call as Konkan coast and all, but as culturally distinct and linguistically distinct communities, they are not visible anymore. And that is also partly because of this what you call as the administrative categories of languages and hierarchy of languages that I had just mentioned about, right? So the Portuguese people who came and settled in regions of Waipin and in and around Cochin are generally referred to as casados. And still there are there are colonies, small colonies in and around Waipin, where this what you call as Luso Indians are still living with their own like Catholicism of a different kind and Catholic Church of their own, and I mean, and in the minimal ways in which what you call as the Creole, the remains of a Creole identity exists, is in the prayers or other kinds of church practices that they still have. Other than that, this identity of the Luso Indians is almost non-existent for the mainstream mind. And they have something called, there are a few things, and most of the people of these communities are have a history of shipbuilding, because the Portuguese brought this shipbuilding practice as a craft. Shipbuilding developed in the Waipin and Cochin region among this Luso Indian community. So they are excellent shipbuilders, and whatever words or usages which are related to shipbuilding, and in those specific practices related to their community, and also in their worshipping practices of Christianity that is specific to that community, those are the only areas where you can see the remnants of what you call as a Creole identity. And there is something called Devastavili they talk about, right? Devastavili is a particular kind of prayer that is specific to the Portuguese Christian community there, and that is where, and it is a Portuguese prayer. Basically, the prayer is in Portuguese, and also as part of the day-to-day communication of Luso Indians who are mostly into fishing and shipbuilding activities. Other than that, and apart from this, the like a major Luso Indian communities that are talked about or studied by linguists are in part of Konkan. There are a few communities, and also they actually extend from Diu to Cochin or even further south of Kerala. So this Cochin Portuguese Creole is the one that is spoken by Christian families in the Waipin Island, and there are other Creoles like Korlai Creole, which is an Indo-Portuguese Creole, which is a Portuguese Marathi language, which is spoken in the Konkan region, which is also called as Christi language. It extends from again 16th century, and it is I think supposedly written in from whatever readings I have done, it is written in Devanagari script. There is a writing practice corresponding to that, which is in Devanagari. But as far as Portuguese Cochin Creole, it is not identified as a separate entity at all. Largely, it is invisible. Yeah. So and in the case of these Creole languages, what is interesting is Creole languages develop when there is an obvious. Of course, there is a linguistic cultural difference between the communities that are coming into contact, and also there will be a superior inferior kind of a relationship between the communities which are coming into contact. So of course, with the history of colonialism, we can know we can guess that the superior there was a superiority of the incoming Portuguese people, which was explicitly there in the creation of the mixed identities or languages. So I think I'll stop here and would listen to anything that others have to add or respond further. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Niveditha, for this very interesting talk on languages and particularly Creole languages. There are still some people who are joining in and who joined in a bit late, so I'll just do a quick summary of what you presented to us. You began by talking about linguistic reorganization as this historical moment in the internal reorganization of Indian territory, and how that consolidated certain ideas of languages being homogeneous and coterminous with territory. But as also you also talked about minority languages as a new category that begins as this new administrative mechanism develops, and how these minority languages at least have some kind of constitutional mechanisms that allow for their promotion, protection, and some rights vested with the speakers of such communities. So, but you spoke about the marginalization of within administration, but also within public, about something that you call as Creole languages, which you very usefully told us about how these are languages that primarily emerges as European colonization spreads across the world. So there's a long history of multiple kinds of Creole languages that come up, particularly in constrained geographies such as islands, and where communities are isolated and are facing the oppression of colonialism. But in the 1940s and 30s and 40s in India, you argue that it begins to lose some kind of distinctiveness, at least in India, partly because of this administrative hierarchies, and that at the moment where we can find these Creole practices and identities are in living practices, I suppose, such as prayers, church practices, and even something like shipbuilding, particularly in the Cochin region. But there is still the question of what happens in this hierarchy of superiority and inferiority of languages. So this is really wonderful for us to start thinking about how do languages develop over linguistic contact, and what role trade, for instance, plays in the creation of many of these Creole identities. But also in terms of how some of these language. Some of these identities are developed in relation to power. It could some kind of state power or colonial power, or so I was wondering if you could. I mean, I'll open up the conversation to others, but for me, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is the role of the state in the post-colonial state, in recognizing or in promoting or in preserving such languages or such identities, or does the state have no role that we can envision in this? So it's a more practical question, but something to begin with. Maybe we could also take a few questions if there are any right now. Otherwise, we could begin with my question. If there are other questions, please unmute yourself and speak, or you could type in the chat. If you raise your hand, I can call on you to speak. I suppose we could start with my question till people begin to frame their questions.
Okay. Yeah. As far as I know, there are no administrative mechanism in place to preserve these communities as such. So one reason may be because there is this history of colonial past, right, related to these communities. So, I mean, that might be one reason. So, even in the case of the so-called languages which are titled as or minority languages, right? So, though there are provisions for protection of these languages, when it comes to actual administrative practices in like education or schooling, I mean, we know that many of these minority languages are losing out. Because most of the time it's the dominant regional language, which would be seen as the preferred language for schooling and or English, right? These are the only ways through which you can get jobs or become part of the mainstream society. So even in the case of minority languages, the administrative mechanisms or existing constitutional provisions are not working in in support of preserving or what it calls like preserving these identities or languages. So we cannot even talk about any provisions existing for Creole language.
Yeah. But should there be one is the question then.
No, I don't think I am not talking about should there be one, but I'm not a preservationist in that sense, because I like to be very clear about that. I'm not for you should preserve certain things as such, because there is a normal course of things that happen like with different kinds of interactions, right? But there should be some kind of documentation about the at least some kind of documentation about the linguistic cultural practices which are existing, because many of these are almost like completely disappearing, and even the minority languages are kind of labeled as like extinct languages, most of them. So Creole languages are not even noticed as like, or Creole communities are not even noticed in that way. So that's why I thought of like at least mentioning about those, that these kinds of things exist. That's it. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Is there something in the chat? No, right?
No, not right. There's someone who has said it's a very informative and interesting lecture. So,
okay, yeah.
Hi, this is Pramod.
Hi.
My question is a little bit different. How would you look at let's take an example of a Telangana Telugu and an Andhra Telugu. Or for that matter, there is a standardization of a language. There's one region which standardizes, and there is a certain dialect of a language. How would you read, how would you see in your formation of this Carol identity? For instance, in Maharashtra, there are different regions like Marathwada or Khandesh or Vidarbha. So they have a very different Marathi, but standard Marathi is a Western Maharashtra Marathi. How would you read? Because of there is a different linguistic community which they interact. For Khandesh, their major interaction is with Gujarat. So you find a lot of influence of Gujarat as well as Dangi, which is again a tribal language. So I'm interested in understanding how would you formulate the dialect and a standardization of a language. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, even this politics of categorizing standard language and dialect is interesting in that sense, right? We didn't talk about it. I just went from like official 22 official languages or what you call scheduled languages to minority languages. But within this official languages or what you call scheduled languages itself, there are these debates of like what comes into being as the standard printed language and non-standard varieties. And as we know, like the whole Telangana agitation and the coming into being of Telangana is based on that, as you rightly pointed out. Yeah, and it's not just in the case of Telangana, right? Even there were demands from groups like Bodo community for a separate state, right? Based on this linguistic-cultural identity as a separate group. So not part of the Assamese identity. So I think there are like looking at the Indian context, the hierarchy of the standard and the so-called non-standard dialects within each region itself is a matter of debate. It's an ongoing debate. But to some extent, I think after these many years of independence and linguistic reorganization, uh, to some extent, in many of the states, those what you call as dissenting voices have been kind of silenced, or to some extent. I am not saying that completely, right? Because I used to like from my experience of teaching linguistics to various groups of students. In like I've taught students in Gujarat, and in the first class when I asked these students about what their mother tongue or first language is, most of the students, even from Rajasthan, many students would say that Hindi is their mother tongue or first language. So I would have to probe and ask them, is it Hindi or is it Marwari or something else? Then with a particular kind of shyness or shame, they would open up and say that, okay, no, it's not Hindi, but this is our community's language. So I wouldn't say it as my first language. So with a particular kind of language planning and administrative mechanisms, it has been hegemonically established among many groups that, okay, the state's language is their language. So the distinction between mother tongue and the administrative language in the case of language versus dialect is getting resolved, or what you call as it's disappearing day by day. Resolved or is it disappearing? I don't know which should be the term, but it is getting reduced day by day as I observe.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Um, so I also had another question, given that you were talking about um, you know, about in your presentation, one of the things that really stood out for me was how you spoke about the regional specificity of these Creole languages in a way. I'm just wondering, as at Kitke Collective, we've been very interested in writing in regional histories, and what are the various vantage points through which we can look at histories of regions. So I was wondering if you could maybe think and tell us a little bit about what can a study of Creole languages and identities open up for us in terms of thinking about the history of a region. You can maybe use your own region that you were talking about as an example, perhaps. Yeah. I think you're on mute.
Okay. Yeah. That is very interesting. Especially, I think in history itself, there is a turn in the recent past with my limited understanding from listening to people and their discussions in history department. You have moved towards like thinking about the sea, right? Looking from the sea, kind of an outlook of late,
Yeah.
right? Especially in the case of peninsular India,
Absolutely.
movement and travel by the sea, migration and contact, right? Historical, like from the colonial times onwards, right? Or even before that. So thinking about the mainland from the perspective of the sea, I think, yeah, I think that is the framework within which these kind of mixed identities make a lot of sense. And with an increasing idea of like defining nation or talking about nation as the major framework and
Yeah.
territoriality within the landed nation, right?
Yeah.
These are the things, the interactions via the sea or through the
Yeah.
sea is something which is not talked about. That is why Kochi is an interesting space for me in that sense,
Mm.
right? So in the within the 10 kilometers itself, you can see the Konkani community. There is a Gujarati community settled there in Kochi. Then there are what you call as like some communities like this Portuguese Creole communities, and then there is a different space for the Jain community as such. So there are linguistic minorities, religious minorities, minorities of various sorts, which inhabits maybe like a small space of within the like 5 or 10 kilometers. And it's not like they are closed off communities in any sense. There has been interactions between these communities in various kinds. So when I went for this heritage work, there is a person named as Bonnie who is actually conducting these works. So he is very like good at bringing up layers of history of this region. So on one street itself, you can see a building coming from Portuguese times, another building coming from the British times. So on the one street itself, you have three buildings coming from different time periods.
Mm.
And he was referring to a certain what you call as slogans that were raised as part of the Indian national movement, and as part of the Indian national movement, and what you call as this anti-British,
Right.
I mean, like yeah, protests and all, right? So there were like each of these communities were participating as part of it in their own different ways. So it seems there was an active what you call as anti-cooch or kind of an anti-liquor kind of a protest, which is part of like as a minor part of this anti-British this thing. And there was a slogan which he told us, like which is part of the Konkani group who are inhabiting that region of Kochi, right? And it was in Konkani, which says that we don't want liquor at all in this region. And it became a slogan, like common slogan for diverse groups of people. So there are these interesting kinds of interactions which happen in this what you call as cultural, linguistic, cultural, political intermixings, right? Which we may have to look into, which may not be otherwise noticed, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, your talk was also very interesting because we have this sort of often made argument that the region can question, challenge some of the national hegemonies. But I mean, there's some work, historical work that takes place in terms of questioning the dominant identities of the region itself, both caste, class, religious, linguistic, I think. So I think that somewhere to look at the dominance or to look at the dominance of some of these regional identities itself, I feel like your talk about Creole identities and paying attention to that will help us think about history of power much more uh, in a much more nuanced fashion, I think. So thank you for that, for this talk, because this allows us to think about regional histories and what are some of the other entry points to which we can do this as well. If Are there any other questions? Well, I have another question. I'm sorry if I'm hogging this, but if please, others, please join in as and when. But since you teach linguistics and have been teaching this for a while and is also your area of research, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how Creole identities or Creole languages fit into your broader into the field of linguistics or comparative linguistics as such. Are they paid attention to? Are they what are the difficulties of studying certain such marginal identities and languages? Do they form a dominant research agenda within linguistics departments in India? Because I'm sure many of us here are not from linguistics, or at least I'm not from. So it would be really useful to understand where this fits in within research agendas of departments.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In the sense that, technically speaking, my basic training is in linguistics, but I teach linguistics as part of a like comparative literature department these days.
Right.
So I have been teaching it either to the English literature students or to the comparative literature students in the past few years. As such, I don't think like in the traditional linguistics departments, not much of an importance is given to Creole languages as such, like research of that sort. It like there are a few, like the one that I was referring to, the Indo-Portuguese Creoles of the Malabar. It's a historical cues and questions. It's an article by Hugo C. Cardoso. So there are a few. It's a 2019 work, I think. There are a few of these kinds of researches, and like this other, there are writings about this French Tamil Creole identity, especially after the publication of the novel from this Portuguese. I think somebody of this Portuguese French background, they have migrated abroad, and from there it's kind of a memory or particulars memorial kind of a thing, right? So it's after the publication of that novel that this has been talked about. So it's in this like small bits and pieces here and there. Other than that, not much of an attention has been paid into Creole languages. Nagamese, of course, whenever we sit in our usual social linguistics classes as part of masters, the first thing we hear about is Nagamese. We always hear about Nagamese because it has a lot of visibility in bringing together different Naga communities as a people of Nagaland. Nagamese has a history of its own. So other than Nagamese, we don't hear about many other Creole languages or communities. Yeah, very rarely.
Okay. Thank you. I think Ajit had a question. Please go ahead and ask your question. Ajit?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you. Please go ahead, Ajit.
Ajit, you're muted.
You're unmuted.
Hi. So the case study you shared was Portuguese and Malayalam. So Creole, you linked it to sustained trade and language contact. My question is, how is Creole formation connected to language loanword adaptation in a language like in Malayalam? Words from Portuguese that are loan words of in particular categories. So, is there a link that is very evident when you look at language contact in a historical linguistic kind of way?
Yeah, thank you, Ajit, for that question. Actually, it brings up certain other discussions also into place, in the sense that traditional linguistics, when we talk about or when we study word formation, morphology, word formation, and all, we always talk about how new words come into being into a language. Then we talk about coinages, right? Then loan words, loan translations, calques. This is how we study like about the basic within the traditional linguistics way of categorizing words. And so there is a way in which traditional linguistics would categorize as like languages and like speech community. The idea of speech community is something which social linguistics bring, right, which can actually break up these traditional divisions. Otherwise, there is an idea of a very compartmentalized language, which is watertight, untouched, and then you bring in things from outside, right? As if like things are coming. So you would teach in a traditional linguistics classroom that, okay, there was no furniture earlier especially like in the region of Kerala, we didn't have this practice of using furniture. So furniture came with with the Arabs or like from people from different other parts of the world. And when these furniture items came, then the term for that item also came. So when sofa, they brought sofa, then sofa came. Or when the architectural style of Portuguese style of architecture came into Kerala, then you have this houses with veranda, and that term called veranda came. So as if there is something originally there prior to this existing, untouched, and then these new items and new words came into being. So it's interesting in that sense that there are arguments. A few, like very few people, maybe minor within the academy itself, minority group who argue that Malayalam itself is a Creole. Because there are dictionaries called dictionaries of foreign languages, foreign words, foreign loan words in Malayalam. It's titled as Malayalatile Paragiya Padangal. Paragiyam is foreign words in Malayalam. And if you look at the list of words, then you will actually wonder what is left in Malayalam if you remove all these foreign words. So looking at Malayalam, because there is a long history of trade and cultural, linguistic, intellectual exchange, that most of the things what you would call as Malayali or of Kerala is largely a mixture of all these things. So then what is it to be like there as Keralites or Malayalis before all these things came, one would have to actually think about. So there are arguments like Malayalam itself is a Creole language in that sense. Yeah, where the idea of Creole is extended to that extent, where you cannot see these words as veranda as a word which is a loan word. Rather than that, it has become a Malayalam word. So where will you demarcate it as foreign or native? Yeah, that's an interesting question in that sense. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Niveditha, for this. Oh, sorry. Chantu, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Niveditha Kalarikkal. So,
Hi.
yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. So I have just, two questions, not questions, and you also just stated. So we have, the history of how languages came to be. That's a long and complex history, which is spread over many centuries. But in some way or the other, I think languages often become fixed, especially when it comes to engagement with this state, in the 1950s, 1960s, and then there's also long history of language movement, for instance, the Vishalandra movement, etc. So how do we think about languages getting fixed, with the engagement with the state? That's one thing. And then some languages becoming, minority languages, and then many are left out of the system. So in such a situation, how do we think about preserving languages here? That's one thing. Second is regarding the Creole languages. What are the methods we think of documenting it? Do we look at it through the food cultures? Food cultures is one way of looking at the existing, picking up words from the food cultures itself. So how do we go about it? And more, I'm more, trying to think about how do we preserve languages or even words from the past. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chandu, for those questions. About the way in which languages, like languages are preserved, certain languages are preserved through state mechanisms and all. That is one issue. I mean, with this variety of languages we have, like according to the 2011 census, as I had mentioned, right, 19,500 odd languages are there. So administration, I mean, it's not just in the post-independence scenario, right? Prior to that, also starting from the colonial times onwards, administration was a major issue, and management of languages as part of administering people was a major issue even from colonial times. So administration always needs what you call as manageable, limited numbers, and this hierarchization of languages into official languages, then minority languages. All this is part of the what you call as how to manage this huge numbers kind of a question that has come up at different points in history. Yeah, in that sense, cannot just stop at 1950 or 1956 state reorganization. So that is where we have to maybe look at 19th century efforts of what you call as administrative and colonial documentation of languages as dictionary making or writing of grammars and all that. As a continuation of this is what culminates in the categorization of languages as what you call a state or what you call as a particular state's language or region's language, or and some languages as minority languages. So most of these languages, even those ones which are identified as minority languages, would have been mentioned in some colonial dictionary, or there would have been a grammar of South Indian languages, so something of that sort, some primers that were used in what you call as teaching or training the administrative officials of the during the colonial rule, which would have named these languages and groups, speech communities as separate entities. So in the case of Creole identities, it's not even there, right? So that would be one reason that these are completely invisible. And of course, the hierarchy. Unlike other languages, there is this particular the cultural hierarchy that would have existed between the European incoming Europeans and the natives, the superiority inferiority kind of a thing, though within this intermixing, which would have led to always seeing these groups or communities as outsiders to some extent. Also, that can also be a possibility. And yeah, food culture, of course. Food culture is there are studies in food culture which has actually led to of late, right? Which has been throwing light on to these traditions, this marginal, what you call as marginal traditions and their cultural practices. Yeah, largely I think food culture studies, or maybe other kind of studies about rituals or practices related to religiosity or faith. They may also be helpful in documenting certain of these, at least some vocabulary items and the history of these vocabulary items. I think religious studies and maybe food culture studies are two major areas which can help in preserving these Creole identities to some extent. Yeah, that's it. Anything that I missed out?
No, that's it. Well, thanks.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Hello, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. Please ask. May I know who this is?
Yeah, I am Anushri, Dr. Anushri Srinivasan.
Yeah,
you
please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm sorry I missed most of your lecture. I just joined in the last minute, so I don't know if I can ask this. But yeah, this is just some of my genuine doubts. So, how do we actually identify a Creole? Because see, there are many other terms in this, related to this, like the mixed languages or the fusion languages. So, so all these things, the terminology is so confusing. So, because recently I did a project on this Devanga speaking community here in Palakkad. Okay, so and for them, the Devanga, they are Kannadigas basically. So they migrated here some 500 years ago, and then they settled here in Palakkad. But Palakkad is bordering to Tamil Nadu, so they currently speak a mix of Tamil, Malayalam, and Kannada. So I am just wondering whether I should call it a Creole or a mixed language or a fusion language. I don't know. So I just, if you could, throw me some light on how we could actually identify a Creole.
Anushree, I think the what you call as a technical definition of a Creole is something the intermixing that happens mostly with European connection, right? So in that sense, the example of like the linguistic community or speech community from Palakkad that you've been talking about is like from within the what you call as scope of Indian subcontinent itself, right? Not from outside. So technically speaking, I think it won't be called as a Creole. You would be, I think you would know it very clearly than me.
No, I didn't
Uh,
know that this had that kind of, like meaning to it. Like Creole, I thought it was just a mix of, languages. Did it have anything to do with European languages? I mean, that's new to
yeah,
me. Is it?
that is one way in which like the what you call as trade across the seas is those kinds of languages, mixed languages, which has been created through these kinds of what you call as inter seas or like I mean what you call as with a colonial past or trade history of that sort is what you call as like Creole identities. Okay, I am talking about not specifically languages in that sense, Creole
Okay.
identities in a larger context. So it is like languages, cultures in as a continuum, not in the traditional linguistic sense as like you will dissect language as a separate thing apart from the community,
Okay,
right?
fine, fine.
So,
Good. Now that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
yeah. So not in the linguistic sense of okay, you have a particular definition of what is a pidgin and what is a Creole, and there is something called in between pidgin and Creole, right? There is another category that a traditional linguist have. So I
Yes,
am
yes.
not going into those kinds of particulars, just taking language apart from culture and studying it in that sense. I hope it
Okay.
is clear. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So this brings us to an end of the first talk of languages of the Deccan with Dr. Niveditha. Thank you very much for taking the time out to get us started on this new series. We'll and for engaging with all of our questions, multiple questions, and really bringing out some of the nuances of both social linguistics. And about Creole identities versus Creole languages as such. So, thank you very much, Dr. Niveditha, for spending this time with us. We'll be announcing the next lectures in both languages of the Deccan as well as past matters soon on our social media. So, please do follow us there. And thank you all for joining us on this Sunday evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Swati, and all the organizers for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.